Hello.
Why the reason for this video, as in like how it came about creating the video and things.
Okay, so if I'm reading this. Yes,
Oh, yeah, sorry. Oh, it's just late.
okay, what's it happening?
2212. Oh, 2212. Yeah, it was like, so my uncle, one day when I went to his house, he just, don't like that. And I was like, yeah, oh, you would like, how do you get rid of it? And I was like, yeah, you should have tried to do it, and that's why you bought a new one. He's like, nah, I wanted a new one. And I was like, it's so nice. I don't, I've never really used it. I'm going to use it when I go on my trip. I'll watch movies and stuff on the plane. Yeah.
Very clear, or what is us?
Yeah. I have to,
Hi, I'm just wondering if somebody can tell me whether they can hear me.
yeah, if one comes on online, yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you. Oh. Hi, Dave, how are you?
Good. Can you hear me?
Oh, can you hear me?
I can't see anyone. I can only see the
And we
slide.
can't hear her. So
My sound is turned up, so it's not that.
okay, we still can't hear you. So
Well, I'll go out and come back in again.
you're going to go out and come back in. Good idea. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so she can hear us now.
Tell me if it makes people see. I won't listen. You're allowed to see. Yeah. So is there a Wi-Fi? It's
Was this after Ben is going to do the
yeah. Yeah.
Okay, can you
Hello, can you hear us? Oh,
I can hear you.
We can hear you. Yeah, that was perfect. Hi, Faye.
The old reboot.
CEO of ACTPOD.
I'll just close my door.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry.
Then that's not the right one.
Now, I know I'm up here compared to Canberra, but I've got a heater going. Can you hear it, or do I need to turn it off?
No, we can't hear it, so you're good.
Right. And can I check sharing my slides?
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
That's what you get when you can't do that. I think Keith might have.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, that's great.
And she's just checking. Oh, that works well. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, awesome. We can see that.
Great. All right. So you want me to take them down for now, though?
I guess so, yeah.
Yes, please.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, so. No, that's really good. I think they look pretty good, don't they? They do. It's just, you know, when you sort of, yeah, because that's the thing.
pretty hot. So you always just can't something else.
Yeah,
You can't just throw it,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Sharon.
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Hi, Sharon. How are you? How are you? Good. Good. Thanks so much for coming. Oh, delighted. Hey, Sharon.
You won't remember me, but I've known you for like first year. Alpha Lion, Race.
Yes.
Others.
I certainly know the thing.
Yeah. So good to see. I'm so glad because we really wanted to have that equity lens and that social impact. So we had a chance to show you the chapter what
Thank you. And have you met Keith before? This is Keith. Keith, this is Sharon. So Keith is our amazing MC.
The expectation.
Oh, yeah. Keith is, I was just found him outside, and I thought, yeah, you look legit, you get MC. Yeah. Yeah, that Canadian accent, I was a little bit worried, but, you know, we don't have much of a choice. It was laughing, it's like, we just put you off, send a little bit different. And then, do you know Leanne? It's Leanne. Sharon. Nice to meet you. Oh, awesome. Lovely street. It's so nice. Yeah. People are just going to be sitting looking outside. They won't be living in there. Yeah, totally. So, basically, yeah, you guys are sitting up in front and we have a panel like these questions. And there'll be like 2 minutes you guys can speak from there. Sort of around like the 4-minute mark, I'll put my hand up the back to let you guys know that it's getting close to the end. And then at the 5-minute mark, put my hand again and keep it because an appropriate time after that to sort of nudge you guys again.
Just grab the mic.
Yeah, just grab the mic. Good one. Yeah. Yeah. I had to do that once. I was treating a session of and I just went on I saw many other things and I just literally hugged them. That's what I like. Yeah.
I might try crying. Yeah, whatever works.
Yeah.
But most of the last time we did, I don't think we got it. I'm sure we got it to lecture, we just stayed.
Oh, that's really nice too. It's more organic and sort of a bit cash. Yeah, perfect.
Because, I think there's actually an anxiety generation going on where you have to get away from your here, all by yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to do it.
Perfect. Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah, cool. Is that okay? Yeah. Well, I haven't got a lot of time, but I'm sure. It's just like 22. Perfect. That's great. All right. We'll see you in a moment. Oh, it's really nice. My cousin just had a baby, so on my way out, I'm going to go past it. It's so good for the print.
Was that the shop? I know, I will.
I've lost sound. Hi, Grant.
G'day, Faye.
G'day, Grant. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, good. Good, thank you. Now, so you can hear me, so that's fine, but I can't hear anything going on there, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think people are just jumping on now, Faye.
Okay. There's people in person in.
I am here too. I'm connected. Corinne's in, so don't worry. Corinne can tell people. Hang on. Let me put my. Oh God, I'm getting backtracked. Perfect. Are you able to just? Hello.
I'm on and I'm looking at everyone. So.
Hello. Yeah, we're just.
You there?
Hi, I'm Corinne. Corinne. HCAC. I'm just at the venue. I've joined via the public Wi-Fi. We've just got a few issues with the internet connection here, which should be sorted shortly. So no need to fret. It's all getting sorted.
I think everybody's used to that kind of thing happening, isn't it? It's just
Yeah, I think so.
the way the world turns now.
Yeah, we do have. We're lucky. We've got someone who's much better at these things than me, which is always good because I just panic if something goes wrong. So
I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person.
Oh, we're really pleased that when Ben said he'd managed, Faye was going to join us. I was like, that is fantastic. So I'm just glad that you could join us, Faye. And same with Grant. I did see your presentation at with Mental Health Australia, which was really great. And I've seen your stuff on this topic. You've written so much about this, so I'm really glad that I'm able to get you too. So. And I think we have.
Great. Happy to help. Happy to help.
I will turn my better mute because otherwise we'll get feedback here. Let me just do that. There we go. Okay. So I think I will just go and meet some of the speakers now, but I will be during the then I will be here on my computer during the presentation. So if there are any issues too, and I'll have my teams on, you can message me just to let me know. And I should be able to see the panelists too and everything. So there shouldn't be any problems, but yeah.
Hi, Faye.
Hey, Ben, how are you?
Good, thank you. How's things?
Okay, thanks. You've been sick, Ben, have you?
Yes. I just got out of hospital last night, so
Oh no.
running a little short on fuel, but
Yeah.
that's the way it goes. But nothing serious, just you know, the usual old man stuff. Old man.
I don't know about the old man stuff. I know about the old lady stuff, so that's I'm understanding.
Old man that doesn't look after his health quite as well as he probably should. So
right. Yeah, my husband just got out of hospital too. That's why I can't come down. So he's had a shoulder operation, so he can't take care of him. Sorry, Ben. I'm sorry to let you down like that, mate.
Oh, look, it's almost the case now, people. It's just comme ça. So many events are hybrid. No one really notices it these days. Yeah. It's not.
And it's much greener to not be travelling by plane.
Oh, look, absolutely. And you know, from our perspective, being able to get people like Grant and Sharon and yourself, it actually makes it so much more accessible to be able to get different people that we otherwise wouldn't be able to get to come along, you know. So
that's right.
And you know, having you being able to sort of talk to the lived experience in Lismore is such a bonus for us, because you know, it's not as though it's easy to get bogged down in the more nitty-gritty technicalities of climate change, but actually just talking about what it really feels like is a different perspective altogether. So really grateful to have you.
Thank you.
So, it looks like we've got over 100 registrations between face-to-face and online.
That's great. That's great.
We're hoping, typically, you never get quite as many people show up as register, but we're hoping for a thorough turnout in terms of people coming along and having a look. So it's proved a very topical topic. We've been planning on doing this topic for 2 years now, never got around to it, and suddenly we decided to bite the bullet with it. And we just as a little interesting thing, we couldn't work out, well, not work out, we were trying to sort of decide what to call the event, you know, what name. We've got the name there. So actually ChatGTP generated the name for us. So it's an AI generated name, mental health and climate change, weathering the storm. It came from an AI bot.
It's scary stuff, isn't it?
Well, and not the problem with it is we threw a couple of options in and this came out and we went, that's great.
I know, that's why it's so scary. People going, oh yeah, that's great. Well, people are redundant now. Let's move on. Let's just clear the earth of people, and things might get back to the way they should be.
I wouldn't want to be working in places like the ABS and organisations like that in the next 5 to 6 years.
Yeah, that's sure.
There's going to be some really interesting changes come about that we can't anticipate yet.
Yeah.
I was talking to a fellow you may well know, Ryan De Silva, yesterday. Yeah. Ryan just rang me up. He wanted to have a yarn about what's going on in Canberra and the like. I haven't met Ryan before, but we had a really good chat, and he seems like a very knowledgeable young man.
Yeah, he is.
Really seems to have his finger on the pulse.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's a go-getter. Trying to find the photos of when I was at the Southeast Asian Summit on Climate Change to get a date. Like, 15 years ago or so.
15.
Yeah, about that. When I first started talking about climate change and mental health.
Oh, you almost sort of forget how long we've been almost arguing in this point. It's sort of like decades and decades and decades now we've been arguing the same pointless argument.
Stand if I can find them.
Hopefully our internet will fix itself.
Still having problems there?
Oh, they're having problems up the at the other end of the scheme.
Is that for the viewers?
Sorry?
Is that for the viewers?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Oh yeah, 2009. So yeah, 14 years ago.
There's a being of similar maturity, you'd remember Don McLean.
Yes.
And he had an album called Tapestry.
Yeah.
And in the album, the song itself, Tapestry, is quite fascinating. If ever you want to have a moment to just YouTube and listen to it, because it actually preempts all of the conversations we're having now in the 60s. And it's one of those amazing examples of art, you know, predicting the future in the way that art often can amazingly do. Yeah. I recall the final line in the song, because I was a musician. Well, I like to still consider myself a musician, but I am not a practicing musician. And the final line in the song is if man is allowed to destroy all he needs, he will have to pay with his life his greed.
Oh, still start.
Yeah.
Which I thought was incredibly poignant for the time.
What have I done wrong? Oh, full stop.
Seems to be a lot of activity going on.
Really better word, sorry.
So do we have someone starting us off here and then we'll do it?
Yeah, Keith will just say like, welcome everyone. Cool.
Easy, easy.
Perfect.
Just going to turn the heater off.
And yeah, sit in any order that you like. If you're happy, we've got it might seem a bit more sort of organic just to use a microphone this way. But yeah, I'll sit up. Yeah. Okay. But also welcome to use the lectern if you like to.
You're out of the jungle.
When people turn up to the other, see people speaking in the corner here as well.
Yeah. Well, we've got, it's all good. I like the curtains, they're nice curtains.
Oh, yeah, they said these turns are.
Are we going, Corinne?
We might wait a few more. Yeah, we'll start shortly. But we don't have, I think people are still arriving in person, so we will start very soon. Mute yourself. I will.
So, Corinne, can I just have a quick chat with Rani? Hi, Grant. It's Ben. We haven't met, but lovely to meet you online. I think you're on mute.
Well done, Ben, organising the conference.
Look, I have to have a little bit of a gripe on this one. Typically, since about 2013 was the first time I hosted a MHCC forum, and since working with them, I've organised them all. But Corinne actually stole this one from me, and took it, took everything. So this is Corinne's vision and her hard work and effort, and so we did the lead work, but Corinne is definitely the credit for this particular event. But thank you for the accolade of doing a bit of work. That's quite a lot of work goes into these, but yeah, Corinne had a very clear vision of what she wanted, and this is I don't know whether you know, but this is the last hurrah for Corinne. We won't be seeing her again. She's moving on to another space, so this is the last event that she'll be officiating as in her role. So
well, good on you. It's a very good topic, and hopefully be really interesting for your audience and relevant, and something that's very engaging for them.
yeah, I'm hoping so. I think given the level of interest we've had in it, I think we've got a good opportunity to be able to have some great conversations.
Right.
Which is, they're very small. But I have thought it is like with a flag, it's so much better than putting it swooping. It's much harder to fall off. Well, yeah, but there's the flag, and they do tend to go for the highest thing. So I'm optimistic. Also, if I'm down, his seat goes up. I hope I understand.
So who wants to use lecture and who wants to head the it doesn't matter to me. I'm gonna be sitting with the mic, but
And it doesn't matter if the wetlands
yeah, this is what I know.
Where's the camera?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm really staying up. He's turned them off, but I'm not over there. My baby rise above them. Yes, we did. But I'm not staying up.
There we go. Oh, look, there's Leanne Craze.
Is Ben ready?
Hello, I'm Keith Mahar, and I want to thank you for joining this forum, either in person or online. First, we're going to hear from Ben Matthews, who's remote, and he's going to do Acknowledge a Country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Keith, and thank you for coming along, and welcome to everyone that's attending online or in person to this event. I think it's a very, very important and special topic, but I also would offer my absolute gratitude, thanks to everyone for making their time and the generosity they offer to attend these events. I've been asked to offer an acknowledgement to country. I'm not going to go into too much detail on what you're about to see, other than over the years, our Reconciliation Action Plan Committee has been working on thinking about the way we think about acknowledgement to country and what an acknowledgement to country actually means. And I've been utterly inspired through a number of workshops and yarning circles and spaces where I've worked with numerous First Nations peoples, and I'll have to say, especially our up and coming young Indigenous people working in the sector and supporting their communities and our communities as well, and the inspiration and generosity that they've offered, and some of the conversations I've had with them about how I've thought about an acknowledgement to country, or what we would call this. What I'm about to show you is actually a short film that we've developed as part of a suite of some resources that you'll be seeing the MHCC roll out over the next 6 months. And I'm not sure whether I really want to call it an acknowledgement to country, but it is certainly what I want to say is an honouring, a thanks, and an absolute sense of gratitude to all Indigenous Australians for the contribution that they offer us, the generosity of spirit they offer us, and also to honour the land that we're actually meeting on today. And so, with further ado, someone will press a button and you will see our acknowledgement to country film clip that we've just put together in the last few months. Thank you.
Dadiri is to listen deeply and be silent, to hear the silence. Dadiri is to be still. Let us all be still, be silent, and truly hear the silence. In silence, we can hear the land we are meeting on, the land of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. In silence, we can hear our elders past and the struggles they've fought for their nations. In silence, we can hear our elders and the children that will take their place. In silence, we can hear our rivers and the salt water. In silence, we can hear the currents of our rivers and sea. The current will have its own pace and direction. It cannot be made faster or slower. In silence, we can all become part of that current, and only then reconcile our past with our present and change our future.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was brilliant. I look forward to seeing that many times in the future. So thank you for doing that. I now want to introduce the CEO, Mel Poole, who will be joining us remotely as well. So away to Mel.
Thank you. And Yuma, everyone, welcome to the MHCC Mid-Year Forum. So I'm Melanie Poole and I'm the new CEO of MHCC, week 3 in the job, I think. I just want to add to that beautiful video that Ben just showed us by acknowledging that all of us are meeting on Aboriginal land today from wherever we might be dialing in from, and that of course the in-person event is being held on Ngunnawal land. I'm dialing in from Kaurna land here in Adelaide. And I'm so sorry that I can't join those of you in person in the at the National Museum of Australia, but I am very energised to be meeting with the CEOs of all the peaks, mental health peaks around Australia here today, to be talking about our national advocacy agenda, and climate change is very much on that agenda. So that has been really exciting. I also want to acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today, and to thank you for being here, whether that's online or in the room. And I want to recognise that the conversation that we're having today about how the well-being of our planet and our environment and our climate is so deeply bound up with our own well-being as individuals and as a society is a conversation that has always been led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have, of course, always understood that when we lose our connection to country, we lose our connection to ourselves and to each other. And that's why Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have fought so hard and so extraordinarily to retain connection to country, even in the face of ongoing colonisation. So I think it's really critical that that's always front and centre when we have this conversation. For me, when I think about the connection between climate change and mental health, I think about things like the bushfires in 2019, 2020, which seems so long ago because we've had COVID since, but was in fact so recent. And I remember things like waking up to the smell of ash in my own house, in my own bedroom, in where I was living in Footscray in inner city Melbourne at the time. And I remember watching children in the park across the road, playing in the little playground with thick ash in the air, and having to breathe that air in as they played. And I remember friends and family who have conditions like asthma suddenly being terrified for their lives because the air that they were breathing that they couldn't escape had actually become so dangerous to them. And we know from research into that bushfire event and other natural disasters that people who live with conditions like bipolar or who are experiencing depression often experience a really significant exacerbation in those symptoms as well. And I also think of things like the floods that hit northern New South Wales last year, those extreme, unprecedented floods that we saw. And the fact that those floods destroyed the homes and the livelihoods of communities who were particularly low-income communities. And of course, researchers also found that marginalised communities, which includes people that rely on income support and people who live in poverty, First Nations peoples, of course, LGBTIQ people, people that live with disabilities and so on, are disproportionately likely to be affected by these extreme weather events. And they're also more likely to be the people who aren't protected by insurance, particularly as insurance premiums become very expensive, and by other sorts of, fallbacks like that, which of course then leads to long-term displacement. And I think I don't need to unpack the extent to which long-term displacement is devastating for the mental health of any of us. And I think the other thing that's important to mention is that as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, again, know all too well, cultural loss is also something that comes with these sorts of events. And we know that rising sea levels are already affecting the homes of Torres Strait Islanders, and that losing that sense of place that we all have and knowledge and history is again something that's deeply devastating to our well-being. So I think when we consider all of those impacts, it's not unreasonable to have what the media often calls climate anxiety in response, and we need to actually be able to make space to sit with the grief of what climate change brings up. But I think it's also so critical that together we sort of stop ourselves from falling into a pit of despair, and we think about how we can generate hope within this context, how we can generate constructive responses, and from the perspective of MHCC, how we can also work with government and others to generate constructive policy responses. And so we're going to hear a lot today from our very impressive panel about how we do this, how we come up with hopeful and positive ways of dealing with these risks and impacts. I just want to say that I think the critical overarching principle is that we need much more targeted policy responses at state and territory levels and at a federal level than what we have at the moment. And by targeted, I mean really policies that are much more explicit in taking into account the interests of of people who are especially vulnerable, people who are living in poverty, people who are struggling with different health conditions, etc. And to give just a broad example of this, a lot of the mainstream policies that we see at the moment are much better at essentially helping the people who are already pretty well off with things like subsidies for brand new electric vehicles or solar panels on your home that you own, and other mainstream policies like that, which are not bad policies, but we need to think a lot more about how we are helping those who are doing it tough. So that's enough from me, I think, and I'm really excited to hear from our panel today. A couple of just quick final things I wanted to mention are that we've got a wonderful new media advisor, Erin, who those of you in the room will get an opportunity to chat with in the networking event afterwards. And Erin has got all our social channels up and running again for MHCC. Keith will give you our tags and so on, but we would really love your engagement online as this event takes place today. Erin's come up with a hashtag, which is climate changes mental health. So please participate in that conversation online. And I think Keith will keep prompting you throughout the day to do that. And finally, I just wanted to also encourage those in the room to stay afterwards for afternoon tea. And as I mentioned, we've got Erin, our new media advisor, and Rani, our new events coordinator, both there, and they're really excited to have this chance to meet people. And we've also got our wonderful policy director who has recently been acting CEO and is sadly leaving us, but staying in the sector to go on to ACT costs, Corinne there today. So please grab a chance to speak to our 3 team members. And without further ado, I'll introduce our panel facilitator, the wonderful Keith Mahar.
Thank you very much, Mel. I want to first pass over to Devin Bowles to actually give us a bit of an introduction into the topic. I want to thank Devin for coming in. He's just started about a month ago as CEO of ATODA, so I'm sure this is a very busy time for you, and I appreciate you giving your time. So I'll pass you over in a very grassroots way, the mic.
Thanks very much for that. I also want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting and pay respects to elders past and present. Our mental health is affected by so many factors, as people in this room and virtual room know well, and climate change touches everything and will reshape our lives in ways that are almost uniformly bad for mental health. And so in terms of mental health effects that I anticipate will be especially exacerbated by climate change, post-traumatic stress disorder and depression and anxiety, I think are going to be much more prevalent because of climate change. And when I talk about climate change affecting everything, I want to just briefly think about how climate change might affect mental health and us in terms of pathways. And so one is the direct physiological way that climate change affects us. So, you know, we were reminded of the fires, and certainly there will be more natural disasters like that, more long-term natural disasters like droughts that will obviously have effects for PTSD for some of the people coming out of fires or floods. But also it will affect things that are more socially determined as well. So climate change, we've known for decades, is going to reduce economic growth. And it won't do that evenly. As Mel very rightly said, it will affect Australians and indeed people in the world unequally. And mostly it'll be the people that are already doing it tough that'll be doing it tougher, disproportionately. And it also will fairly obviously affect the ecological systems on which we rely and on which many of us rely for mental health. So the ability to get out in the bush and get the recharge that so many people find useful, and which the research is increasingly showing us, if we expose our kids to the bush when they're young regularly, to things like rivers, that has a mental health protective effect that lasts with them their whole life. And for those of us in Canberra, things like the bushfires, things like heat waves, just reduce the number of days that we can take kids out into the bush or get there ourselves. Although it is particularly pertinent for kids because they have windows of development where if you miss it, you miss it. And so one bad summer means they've missed a window. And in terms of some of the socially mediated health effects, we're going to, as a society, experience pockets of deep financial loss. So there are a number of rural farming communities that'll see their ability to support themselves through farming diminished. One of my colleagues, Ivan Hannigan, as part of his doctoral research, looked at droughts not related to climate change in New South Wales and tracked suicide rates in rural New South Wales and found that, not surprisingly perhaps, suicide rates went up with droughts. And as climate change progresses and droughts become longer and deeper, we can reasonably expect suicide rates, particularly in marginal farming communities, but also in other rural communities, to increase. And that will be, in some ways, obviously there will be, that is tragic, but it will on some level be the canary in the coal mine, because it will be hinting at wide scale depression and anxiety and loss that really is catastrophic for individuals and indeed for communities. There are really profound intergenerational differences that we need to think about in all this. I really share the perspective that in some ways climate anxiety, if we want to call it that, is a reasonable thing. There is a school of thought in mental health that things like depression and anxiety were actually selected for among our ancestors, which is why they're so widespread now. And the reason they were selected for is because they were excellent signals when some major part of our ancestors' lives were not going well. Something needs to change here. And as we collectively face climate change, boy, something needs to change here. And the problem is not feelings of anxiety or depression. The problem is that so many people are so daunted by the size of the problem and its seeming inevitability that we're unable to make that adaptive response to get us over the anxiety or depression. Our hands are tied. So I think the call to think about over the rest of today about how we can collectively, adaptively respond in ways that let us address the anxiety and let us address the thing that is driving the anxiety is a really good one. And I look forward to that conversation.
Thank you, Devin. A bit of housekeeping. If anyone needs to use the toilets, they're out here to the right for people with us. They're also the exit signs. If anything, in an unlikely emergency, there are 2 exit signs here and here, and we can go out by the lake. For anyone joining us online, we will defer to your authority in terms of where you know the closest toilet area is and where your own exit is. So I appreciate you looking around wherever you are. I want to introduce Leanne Craze. Leanne was actually my social work supervisor for my last placement, so I want to thank you very much for getting me through that. Leanne, from being the secretary of the inquiry into human rights of people with mental illness in the 1990s to co-authoring the National Framework for Recovery-Oriented Mental Health Services and peer work frameworks, Leanne continues to contribute to the ongoing development of mental health services. In recent years, Leanne has sought to promote awareness of the mental health impacts of climate change and in ways in which services and communities can work together to respond. In 2017, Leanne was made a member of the Order of Australia for her contribution to mental health services. Leanne also has a PhD in social work in the care of treatment of mental ill offenders. Thank you very much, and here you go.
And Keith, you were an awesome student. Weathering the storm. I'd like to suggest action at 3 levels, which will assist us to weather the storm of climate change and its impacts. The first level is at the level of Australian governments. The second level is at the service and agency level. And the third level is at the individual level, us, our homes, our households. So coming to the Australian government level, so meaning by that national, state, territory and local government levels. Each level of government need climate change policy, plans and strategies that articulate and act on the mental health impacts of climate change. And all of those levels of government also need mental health policies, actions and strategies that articulate and point to actions on climate change and its impacts on mental health. Both are interrelated. Without a livable climate, there will not be mental health. And without mentally healthy communities, it is unlikely that Australia and the rest of the nations will be able to pull off, implement, sustain climate change strategies, effective climate change strategies. We also need housing, income, infrastructure, taxation, social and community development strategies that embrace climate change and mental health impacts of climate change. For example, with housing, increasingly people are living in unlivable housing. We need housing policies that make it clear what are livable housing standards and what are acceptable development standards as well. We need these strategies at all of these levels to bring together science. Isn't it wonderful that we can talk about science in Australia's national capital again? To bring together science, First Nations knowledges and wisdom, and also lived experience of people with mental health issues and also of communities. At the service and agency level, services and agency representatives here today, do think about how you own your carbon footprint and what you do about having a sustainability, an approach to sustainability. As Mel said, make space for people's anxieties and concerns about climate change. In particular, children and young people and young adults, allowing them to speak about their disappointment, their anger, and often their sense of helplessness. It pains me that many young people have, with due cause, given up on my generation, under whose watch so many things, unfortunate things, have happened to our planet. But when we start to talk, we can also start to act together. Then also agencies and services who are providing direct support to people do start to have disaster preparation conversations. There are some excellent resources out there. For example, Queensland Emergency Services has developed disability disaster preparation plans and handbooks, and also a program of peer support that I believe could be picked up and copied. And then agencies and services, think about advocacy. Is it appropriate? Is it okay to continue to house people with mental health issues and psychosocial disability in unlivable housing? Is it okay that people cannot afford energy? So have a think about the advocacy that you can be part of. Thirdly, at the individual level, let us do what is within our means to do, because doing and acting does give us hope and it will have an impact. We can act as individuals, as families, in our relationships, within our neighbourhoods. We can consider our carbon footprint. We can look at actions in the area of waste, of the use of plastics. There are many things that we at an individual level can do. I would recommend the 5 Ways to Wellbeing framework, which talks about connecting. So connecting with people who are concerned about climate change, who are concerned about mental health impacts, being active and taking action, perhaps joining bush care, land care, or guerrilla planting. Keep learning with others about the impacts of climate change and the solutions to climate change. Be aware and take notice of the impacts that we are seeing around us, as well as what it is that helps us to have well-being and to maintain hope. And then finally, help others. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leanne. And if you have any, if any questions come to mind, you can always send them in through, even while the presentation is going on, to hashtag climate changes mental health. And that way we have a whole bunch of questions for the panelists afterwards. Thank you very much, Leanne. Our next panelist is joining us remotely. Faye Jackson is the General Manager Inclusion at Flourish, Australia, and the inaugural Deputy Commissioner of the New South Wales Mental Health Commission and Associated Fellow of UTS, and also the CEO of Vision in Mind. Faye, I hope you're there online, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, can you hear me? People hear me? Great. I'm going to share my screen. I have a few slides here, so I'll just share my screen. Hopefully this works. Okay, can you see those? So I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on, which is the Bundjalung Nation people, which is up near Byron Bay, Lismore. So I'm in the Northern Rivers area where unbelievably was ravaged by bushfires in this amazing green and usually wet forest that people thought wouldn't burn, and it did. And then we were ravaged by the floods and the never-ending rain of last year. So I'm just speaking with you very briefly about this. I spoke, first of all, about mental health and climate change at the Southeast Asian Summit on Climate Change back in 2009 in Taiwan. And it seems to have taken a long time for many services to be thinking about the seriousness of the mental health, the connection between mental health and climate change. I grew up on a farm, so I was very aware of what the climate change was doing. When I was a small child, we might have 3 good seasons to 1 bad season, and then it got 2 bad seasons to 2 and went on to, and in the end, it was not viable to continue farming. So the floods, there's just a few slides here because we can talk to you, but I think that often without vision, we can't really take in what actually happened in the Northern Rivers. And even with the pictures, you can't hear it. You can't hear it, you can't smell it, you can't feel the terror that was here, the trauma that landed on us all overnight. And what people can't also understand is that there was no electricity, no food, no water, no way of communicating, no internet, no texting on phones, nothing. The only way we could communicate was from neighbour to neighbour. And we all did what we could do. I think that there are 3 stages that we need to really consider. We need to consider the before the disasters, if we have an idea of what's coming, the preparation. And in talking to many services since the floods happened, I can see that services just can't wrap their heads around it. They can't not think, they can't imagine no electricity, no phones, no water, no way of buying anything. They can't imagine being starving. People were starving here. We had no food, no water. We were surrounded by water, but we couldn't drink any of it. They called us the mud army. They should have called us the shit army. We were working in sewerage. And it was devastating on so many levels. Thousands of people were made homeless, and thousands of people still are. There's the before, the preparation wasn't done, should have been done. Obviously, it wasn't expected to be as bad as it was, but they knew it was going to be bad, because all of the emergency services from the area that I live in, which is closer to the Queensland border than Lismore, about 40 minutes north of Lismore, all of the emergency services were sent to Lismore. We had none up here, not one single person. All the police, all the paramedics, all the SES, everybody was sent to Lismore because they knew it was going to be bad in Lismore, but didn't know that it was going to be as bad as it was. So the only people that could help up here were us, were each other, our neighbours. And there are, while we talk about, we have the narrative of, I'm a voice hearer myself, and have extreme anxiety and everything myself. We have the narrative of the, the marginalized people and the people who are most vulnerable, or being people who are poor, absolutely, and also people who already have mental health issues. But in that second stage, when the flood was happening, that rain was coming down and would not pass, would not move on, it wasn't anything about who had mental health issues and who didn't. We all had to be there for each other. And it was something that I really loved about this thing. There is you do have to look for the beautiful things that happen within the trauma. And people who would normally shun people who are voice hearers, who respond to their voices, or who have extreme anxiety and who obviously have mental health issues, would often be, excluded from being involved in helping their community. No one could be excluded. Everyone had to do their bit, including people who were responding to the voices, obviously, while they were working. We were all working side by side, and I thought it was a really wonderful opportunity to prove that people with lived experience are as capable as people who don't have lived experience of mental health issues, of being really valuable members of our community in this crisis time. And if we can do it in our crisis, in the times of crisis, then let us do it in other times. Services, the community need to prepare for not being able to communicate. No way. You need to get this in your heads. No way to communicate except by word, by mouth. And very often the noise was so strong, so loud, you couldn't hear people anyway. You need to be prepared. There was no food security. There was no food here. People were starving. And there's the after stage where it's the mop up and the devastation. My daughter lost absolutely everything. By the flood kept on coming in stages. By the third stage, it took the vegetables out of the ground. She lost everything. And many people here did. We didn't lose everything. We lost our car and a third of the value dropped off our property overnight. But we almost lost our daughter. And so we were just so grateful she was saved out from under the water. What the media portrays is nothing compared to what is actually here. And we have these well-meaning, but totally in the dark bureaucrats making comment afterwards about what should and shouldn't have been done. We did what we had to do, and we saved thousands of lives by putting ourselves on the line, by putting ourselves in danger. They've been saying things like, you can't go in, they shouldn't have gone in to those floodwaters. Well, if we didn't do that, thousands of more people would die. Then came the insults to us about that when we got to the point where we could get food to people, that we weren't following food handling protocols. You couldn't follow food handling protocols. There was no electricity here for refrigeration. There was no way of heating, like they just make these statements without having any understanding of what the reality of it was like. These are my photos. This photo, can you see those wheels attached to an axle underneath that little tree? That little tree, whose trunk is only about that big round, don't know whether you can see that, saved my daughter's life and two other young men. My daughter was trapped under the water. A tidal wave of water came down through the bush, and my daughter was out tying trailers to a tree to try and save her trailers. And she was watching the river. She thought the river would come across that way. But what happened was from behind her, water came down, a tidal wave of water came down through the bush, which had been caused by the landslips that I showed in the earlier photographs. She got dunked under the water and was trapped under there by the rope tied her under the water. A young man, just a traveller, was standing on top of a hill looking down. You have to remember this is at night, 2:30 in the morning. And he saw a beam of light under the water that wasn't travelling with the water. And he went in, he thought, I think that's Anna. He'd seen her the night before with a torchlight on her forehead. So he put his life on the line. He had a knife in his pocket and he cut her loose and he brought her up. He tied her to him. They went down with the water. They came across another person, tied him to them. And then they, thank God, they got washed onto this little tree. And he tied them to this little tree. Then the water reached up to their mouths and they were going to drown. And this axle and tires wedged behind their legs. They jumped up and stood on top of that axle for 3 hours until it was light and until the water went down a little, and it saved their lives. We need to really understand that, my thing. We need to really understand that this was total devastation. Total. This is a man sitting on a street there. This was part of the Mud Army working. That was International Women's Day. I was supposed to be giving a keynote. That's me there, part of the working of that time. And that was my daughter's vegetable garden. So we need to ask, you need to be prepared for all of these things. I'll leave these slides and pass on now, but I think these slides may be able to help you afterwards. So there's the before, the during, and the after that needs to be considered. There's also certainly the mental health of everybody, not just the people who already have mental health issues, because I've been talking to many, on the 4th month, the conversations changed from what happened to I'm suicidal. And I was having multiple conversations a day with people who were suicidal. So we need to prepare for the after and the long term, because now more people are suicidal, as the government haven't been honouring the buybacks or the different things that they've said that they were going to do. And also the insurance companies are still blocking people. So people now at this time afterwards are having to relinquish their pets and also having to put their children into foster care because they have nowhere to live. We need to prepare.
That's terrible that you had to go through that. I'm going to have to, I'm getting the word that the time is coming up, but we'll come back to you when we have our questions. That's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got a tension with technology. Technology and I don't get along all the time. So I'm reading these bios from my phone. So please bear with me. But the next guest panelist is going to be Sharon Friel. Sharon is an Australian Research Council Laureate Fellow, Professor of Health Equity and Director of the Planetary Health Equity Hothouse and Australian Research Council for Health Equity at the Australian National University. Her work focuses on governance of the planetary, social, and commercial determinants of health inequities. She's a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences of Australia and the Academy of Health and Medical Sciences of Australia. Thank you very much. Very good. Thank you.
I'm just going to stand up for a wee change. Is that okay? We'll get our eye muscles moving. So before I start, I also want to acknowledge the First Australians on whose land we're meeting, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and really look forward to the important referendum that's coming. I was going to give you a whole load more of the facts of despair, and I think I'm not going to, because a number of the remarks that each other colleague has given really, I think, has illustrated the extent of the problem, the absolute despair that's associated with climate change and mental health, all forms of health, but particularly mental health, and how it is so unequally distributed, it's unequally experienced, and the inequities within society fundamentally exacerbate that relationship between climate change and health. But I think as we sit, and we've heard the importance of sitting with both the grief and certainly the post-traumatic stress disorder and all sorts of trauma that has come from the experiences that we've heard from Faye. We have to sit with that, but I also hope we get incredibly angry about all of that, because to me what that tells us is a fundamental failure of government to protect society in the way that they were elected to do, and certainly our politicians. And so we should be incredibly angry about the messages and the data that we've heard so far. I do want to just give you one fun fact, which really just illustrates even more the inequities within this experience of climate change and health. So we've heard about how socially marginalised people are the people who are least, and particularly economically marginalised people are the ones who are least likely to be able to adapt to this situation. If you were Kim Kardashian, and thankfully there are not so many Kim Kardashians in the world, but if you were Kim Kardashian, you could have paid for your private firefighters at the time, if you remember the fires that were down the west coast of the US. And what somebody like Kim Kardashian was able to do was literally to bring in their own firefighters. That is fundamental inequity between both public and private responses to a situation like climate change, but also the underlying inequities in wealth that exists. And Australia is one of the most unequal countries and rapidly growing unequal countries. And so to do anything about this, it goes to really, I was nodding my head vigorously when Leanne was speaking, because what she was telling us is good social policy, good economic policy is fundamental to climate change adaptation for mental health. And it's fundamental for climate change adaptation for equity in mental health. And without good social policy, everything else, we can forget everything else. So why is it that we have this situation? So we've heard about what has happened in northern New South Wales and in Lismore, and in the floods in Lismore back in last year, but it was also the same in 2017. Lismore was also affected by the floods in 2017, and almost nothing had changed within that those neighbourhoods. That was a fundamental failure, again, of social policy, of economic policy, of labour policy that enables the conditions for people to live a healthy life. So if we have extensive evidence that tells us that to live a life that we have reason to value, to live with dignity, to live with hope in our lives, to adapt to the environmental stressors that we're all experiencing, to prevent poor health, to be able to access the sorts of health and social care services that is needed. The evidence tells us that we need three things. We need enough material resource, we need a sense of control over our lives, and we need a voice at the decision-making tables that affect our lives. And that basically, to me, is the social determinants of health. So why is it not happening? Imagine changing the narrative that isn't all about the personal responsibility to pull up your bootstraps and get on with life in ways that protects our health. Imagine if we had a narrative that was about a social model of health, sustainable prosperity. All of that is completely within the realms of political and social possibility. Let's mainstream that sort of narrative. Let's move away from government policy or services coming in and fixing things in a very reactive way. Imagine if there was a long-term vision that actually says we're going to address the underlying issues here. It might take us a generation, but we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. And we're going to do it with a very explicit focus on equity. We saw some of the glimmers of possibility of that through COVID. Some of those policies were put in place and then they were pulled right back. Right now is a time to engage. There's the National Suicide Prevention Strategy currently under development, and there is attention being paid to some of these social issues. Engage with that. Engage with the ACT's right to a healthy environment policy as well. Now's the time to be involved with that. One of the reasons that we're told that we don't get the sorts of big, progressive, bold, courageous policy is because civil society is too quiet. We don't demand that sort of action. And again, we heard from Leanne, now is the time to organise within something like this coalition, the Mental Health Community Coalition. Be noisy, be very noisy civil society advocacy groups. This is the coalitions of hope, the webs of influence. And it's not just about advocacy for adaptation and the sorts of social and economic policy that we've been speaking about, but we've also got to mitigate further climate change. So it's that combination of adaptation and mitigation. And it has to be about structure, well, not has to be, service intervention is incredibly important as well, of course. But why are we not getting action on the structural factors that are contributing to the inequities that we see within society? So please don't allow the pushing down onto communities to have to solve the problems for themselves when, like we've just heard, as to what happened in Lismore. That's just not acceptable. That puts all the responsibility onto communities who are already doing it tough. Push up, ask, push, demand for the sorts of structural interventions that prevent those conditions in the first place. Because without that, we have to work out how we don't constantly have and keep despair convincing us, but it's about how do we make hope incredibly practical. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And also, just the, I just also want people to acknowledge Faye and give Faye a hand, because I think that lived experience of going through that difficulty also is really important in terms of capturing what's going on with climate change. So thank you very much, Faye. I have to say, I'm not getting a lot of support in this room, I don't think, for the stage 3 tax cuts. I think that's very clear. There's better ways to spend that money. Yes, get noisy, learn from France. So the next panelist is Dr. Grant Blashki. He's proudly the lead clinical advisor at Beyond Blue and has been exploring the links between climate change and health over the last 2 decades in his roles as associate professor in global health at the University of Melbourne and as adjunct associate professor at Monash Sustainable Development Institute. He was a co-founder of Doctors for Environment Australia and has been a mentor in the Gore Climate Reality Program since 2006. He has co-authored 140 peer-reviewed publications and co-edited 10 books. Recently, he co-authored a report led by the Climate Council in collaboration with Beyond Blue, exploring the state of Australia's mental health in relation to climate change, including recent extreme weather events. Please welcome Grant.
Now, I'll just check that you're hearing me there okay. Thumbs up. Yep. All good. And I'm sharing slides, I believe. Okay. It's really fantastic to hear my colleagues speak today, and there's such thoughtful perspectives on this, and congratulations to MHCC for doing this topic. I really like Sharon's phrase, the coalition of hope. That's great, Sharon. And I think this is very much coalition of hope. And it's important when you're hearing these very confronting facts about climate change that people listening don't feel paralyzed, because it's easy to come away thinking, well, that's great. What the hell can I do? And I share Sharon Friel's view that we need to put pressure on government and on the systems and the way we're doing services as well. I'll tell you a little bit about our study and then just talk about 3 practical approaches that I think are very helpful for people who are working in this field. And never underestimate the power of the mental health sector at this time. And I agree, be noisy, and we have a really important voice at the moment. You can chase up if you're interested in the great detail about our survey. So I'm just going to talk to the headlines. I'm aware we don't have lots of time, but we were very excited to do a report with Beyond Blue and the Climate Council, just documenting and really, capturing some of that really important story that Faye Jackson presented to us. And we did a quantitative survey of about 2,000 people, and then also asked people to tell their stories. And we're really asking what were people's experiences since 2019. And a couple of headline things to be aware of is that 80% of Australians have experienced some form of extreme weather event. That sounds super high, but I guess in that is also included things like heat waves and all the air pollution that came over the cities during the bushfires. So this isn't something that just happens to someone else anymore on the news. So many people in Australia are experiencing it. Half of people are saying those disasters had some effect on my mental health, and 20% are saying it had a major or moderate effect on my mental health. So they are important. And as we heard a bit earlier with some of the framing, it's not just the direct impacts, but it's the indirect impacts, which are also important. And I think in the introduction that was covered very well. A couple of points to make: that some groups were certainly worry about climate change is very high in the community. More than 50% are very worried or fairly worried about climate change. Even higher amongst rural areas, young people, women, and it's not on this slide, but people who've been caught up in extreme weather events. This research is really, supported by other research. There's a new Beyond Blue survey not out yet of more than 5,000 people, and that is showing that climate change is very much on people's map of the things that they're concerned about. I was also very impressed with that 2021 study by Carolyn Hickman, more than 20,000 young people, but showing very high levels of concern about climate change. So just reiterating what we've heard today, climate change is causing a lot of worry and stress and trauma in the community. What can we do about it? You can hear I'm a GP as well, aren't I? I'm like, right, what are we going to do about it? I like this little way is how I think about it, particularly if you're working in this area. And like our other speakers, I like threes. So problem solving. Can you put your energy into helping improve the problem? Contributing to making good decisions in the community. And we heard a lot there about the importance of good social policy, housing, energy. What sort of decisions are we making at a policy level? And also those everyday actions that you make, don't underestimate the value of those. Badgering your local member, and even those day-to-day activities you can do, like active transport, eating local food, reducing your own footprint. Every bit helps, and it is, important to be as active as you can be. Now, what do we do with these emotions? And we've already heard about some of them. It's all or nothing. I've got to solve this. Nothing can be done. And of course, all of us have to go through that journey of the grief of what is going on with the climate. Look at the predictions. It's terribly distressing. But I think if you're going to work in this area, you do need some tools to look after your emotions, know when to back off a bit, know when to reframe it. I like the idea with a lot of my super enthusiastic students is find the little piece of the puzzle that's your puzzle. And importantly, keep your sense of joy. You can be aware, people are great at living with cognitive dissonance. You can be aware of how serious the climate change problem is, but also be having immense joy and fun in your life at the same time as well. And that's really important so that you don't sort of embody the doom and gloom of this topic. And finally, on a deeper level, I just want to talk about meaning-based approaches. And we heard some beautiful discussions about Indigenous perspectives at the beginning of our session. And I think whatever your background, if it's religious, if you're an atheist who's just got this incredible sense of awe about, the evolution of intelligent life on our planet, whatever it is, if you can link your work, your efforts to what matters to you most, it might be about your family, the next generations. But I think that gives you a resilience and helps you keep up the marathon of this serious battle to deal with the climate crisis. So there are lots of supports out there. And I would just encourage you, if you're working in this area, to just keep an eye on where am I on the continuum? Am I getting paralyzed by this climate worry, or am I thriving? Am I sort of understanding it, but what they call active hope or mature hope, having a hopefulness and an energy, even though you understand how serious it is. A couple of good supports to be aware of. We're always happy to hear from you at Beyond Blue. I'm very impressed with the group called Psychology for a Safe Climate, who also understand, have a listing of climate aware counsellors as well, if you're really having a hard time. But have a strategy to look after your emotions if you're going to work in this area, because it can really get under your skin, and it's obviously a very confronting problem that we're dealing with. So thank you, and I look forward to participating in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Grant. Thank you so much to all the speakers. Once again, you can reach out with questions at #ClimateChangesMentalHealth. And I think we've got a roving mic in the room if someone has a question for one of the panelists or more. Any questions?
So maybe yeah. So we do have some questions from online. So I might just start with we've got two from the panel here. From Daniel Carol Tully, she's asked a fairly long question. It was in response to what Devin spoke about earlier in relation to anxiety and depression. So Tanya was born with a neurological birth defect, and she's asked that others like herself often have mental health issues like anxiety, depression, PTSD, or other issues. And when there is a major extreme weather event like floods, cyclones, she noted when there was Category 5 Cyclone Yazi back in 2011, she had to try and cope with no power for 4 weeks, limited phone connections and hardly any food supply. So she's asked, when will federal and state and territory governments learn from past disaster mistakes that have happened like that on the East Coast and across Australia? And I think she's also raised that issue around when there is, people may have disability and intersects with mental health or other intersections. So perhaps, when will what needs to happen for federal and state and territory governments to actually act on some of those lessons, but also secondly, taking into account those intersections between mental health and neurological birth defects and other disabilities and so forth.
Okay, I'll pass over to Devin. I think that's a good at-cost question.
Thank you. I guess I'd say 2 things. When will change happen? In some ways, those of us in the ACT are quite lucky. So we think of climate change as being a global problem, which it is. But we are uniquely well positioned to do something about it. And the reason for that is Australia is, in some respects, a laggard with climate. And while our country level contributions are not especially high, compared to some other countries, our per capita ones are. But we are important because we provide political cover for other bigger countries to also be laggards. And so if we can change Australia, it actually makes a real difference to world emissions. So how do we change Australia? Well, we're a federated model of government here. And we're a laboratory of democracy. We in the ACT are often the first out of the gate with interesting and good social policy. We've seen it with decriminalization of drugs. We've seen it with increasing the age of criminal responsibility. 2 major things for Australia where we're first just in the last year. The ACT can lead Australia in this. And if it does that, it will have global impact. Right now, the ACT government is seeking feedback on its preventative health action plan. That is through the end of the 28th of this month. We're a small community. If 2 rows of people in this audience, never mind the people online, do the survey and mention climate change and mental health, that'll make a huge difference to how the government perceives things. If 5 more people, maybe from online, put in written submissions if it's 5 people with some expertise in climate change or in mental health, that'll make a big difference as well. I think the government is starting to put in some infrastructure within its bureaucracy around climate change and health. Now is a really a time of great potentiality for us right here in the ACT with things that can make a real difference. So that is one very practical, you can go do it. It'll take you 15 minutes if you're filling in the survey. It'll take you a couple of hours or more if you're doing a written submission, but it'll make a real difference. I guess in terms of, neurological differences, we're straying outside any claim to my expertise. But from an evolutionary perspective, we have built in, as a species, a tendency to anxiety and depression. And it is reasonable and probably even helpful for populations to have a bit of diversity about that. Because in your group, in your ancestral band of people, you want someone who's maybe a little bit paranoid, right? Because it's useful to have that perspective in your decision making as a group. And so all I can say is, there are a lot of really valuable perspectives that in other cultures are celebrated and acknowledged, and that in Western culture is diagnosed. And just to sort of validate what, the diversity of perspectives, and say that, as a society, we need to be listening to people who are really anxious or upset or distressed by what's happening. That is the appropriate societal response.
Yeah, if you'd like to Google on Queensland's Disability Inclusive Disaster Risk Reduction Strategy, it really does give us a set of tools that can be used to get talking and planning with people with disability about how they might prepare for a disaster. For example, there's the person-centered emergency plans. There's a person-centered emergency plan workbook, and there's also a peer leadership program. So people with disability being able to support others with disability to plan for the possibility of disasters. If I could just commend those resources to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you have a website?
Oh, sorry, I don't have it because I just have it as a. Try Googling on Queensland Disability Inclusive Disaster Risk Reduction and person-centered emergency plans.
Yep. We'll send around a recap of this forum and we'll include the link in that email.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have another question if we don't have one in the audience. Do you want to go to that now? Is that right? Yep. Okay, this one is a very short and succinct one. So it's from Cass. Is there evidence that climate change is directly linked to suicidality?
I'm wondering if Grant, do you want to mention, do you have some comments?
Yeah, so I think one of the difficulties, I might take my headphones off.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I think one of the difficulties with some of the research around measuring and inferring causation about climate change through to, for example, suicidality, is that there's so many links in the chain there. you might have to go climate change caused extreme weather event, caused a mental health problem, caused a suicide. So it's very hard, especially when you've got a very high prevalence issue like mental health. Now, there is some research done, and I think it might have been Devin who mentioned it, or one of the speakers mentioned it. There is some evidence around droughts and suicide increased risks that has been done. But I think I'm not aware of a specific large-scale study that can say absolutely. I think we're mainly in the world of associations there. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who one of the big contributors to their choice to take their own life was either a mental health condition related to extreme weather or despair, absolutely. But in terms of the research, it's a really tricky area to actually pin down. So thanks for the question.
Thank you, Grant. Actually, in preparing for this this talk, I Googled and I found a research that comes across that, and it's climate change and mental health, a scoping study from 2021, and it's from the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, and that does looks at a whole bunch, I think 120 different studies, and does try to make some correlations. But as Grant said, it's not a perfect science, but it's a really interesting paper if you want to look at that. I also want to say that I'm from Quebec, which is a French province in Canada. So that activism is not about burning the streets; it's about being active in the streets. So I just want to say that that's a very big difference. So yes, get active. So that's my memo. So is there another question from? We've got two coming. Yep, great.
Thank you. So we're talking a lot about survival and supporting people with mental health and disabilities, and often there's dual cases to include in that picture as well. So I'm just asking, does anybody know, does the National Australia NDIS have strategies and procedures that people can follow when there's really serious crises like floods and fire and other crises in our nation for multicultural Australia?
Sure. I'll ask actually, Faye, are you still online?
I'm not aware specifically for multicultural Australia. I think they did put some work out last year, but I'm sorry, I'm not aware of that being specifically for multicultural Australia.
And Faye, do you know what's going on with the peak body? Because Faye was on the consumer reference group years ago, and I'm just wondering, that might be if we do, there is money being put into a national peak body. Maybe that's something that could come out of that kind of work.
Yeah, my understanding is that that they an EOI went out to universities to apply to be the people who prepare the governance structure and that for the peak bodies. I'm a bit out of the loop of it. I'm afraid it's gone into the government and then out of the government's door to some universities, and that's where it is just at the moment.
Thanks, Faye. We have someone from the NDA that's looking at multicultural aspects right now, so thank you very much. See, this is a very diverse crowd in here. We've got a lot of expertise in this room and online. Is there another question coming from? Oh, we've got another question over here. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for this discussion. It's very timely. I work for Landcare ACT. I facilitate our Wellbeing Through Nature program. So for me, I guess I'm coming at it from more of that conservation-based history, but we're realising that we have to take responsibility on this issue for people. So our program is funded by Department of Health, which is really unusual because previously we've got most of our funding from Department of Environment. And I guess it's speaking to the crossover that's needing to now happen, that we can't afford to silo environmental outcomes and personal human health outcomes anymore. However, that project is funded by government for 2 years, which we've done a lot of groundwork on, and there's definite need to continue the program. So now that we're drawing to the close of that 2-year period, my question is, how do we best translate particularly the benefits for preventative health, not just in these extreme situations, but in, I guess, cultivating resilience for people on a day-to-day basis? I've had people say to me, I've never heard so many frogs calling at once, and that gives me hope. and I don't know how to translate that into a statistic for somebody, that person is now feeling motivated, calmer, that sort of thing. So from us coming as a environmental organisation, wanting to link with health organisations and also to leverage with government, if you have any advice as to the best course forward for us now that
Sharon,
we're
do you have-
entering that 2-year end.
I think I have a person to answer your question.
I mean, that's just such a lovely example. And I would say don't try and put a number on that, because that story is, I've done a lot of work with ministers who say, tell me the story. How do I get on a bus and communicate? And that's just a beautiful way of framing the positive effects. Well, a number of, particularly at the ACT level, so with the ACT Preventative Health Strategy, I think you mentioned it, Devin, they really want to connect across government, and so would be very receptive for that. A conversation with the ACT Chief Health Officer would love to hear that, because I had exactly the same conversation with her the other day, and she was saying, how do we work out how to connect better across government departments? So there would be right now incredible reception. And then, of course, at the ACT level, we also have the well-being framework. So every government department is supposed to be putting a well-being budget, or the budget submission is through a well-being framework, and that offers real potential as well. So there's a few pieces of government apparatus that are in place that are very receptive right now. And the language that, certainly in the public health world, the language that I see being used increasingly is the co-benefits. It was around about 20 years ago and it's come back again. So the demonstration of the co-benefits for the environment, co-benefits for human, physical and mental health, co-benefits for the economy. So the demonstration of that. And then it's about how the frog story how you use that story to make those connections between the different departments. But right now you would get a lot of reception, I think.
Activities are volunteer based. Our vast body of land care is 6,000 volunteers on the ground giving their time already.
Thank you. There's not a lot of costs necessarily involved in that aspect. So it doesn't look like it's an expensive program and, why can't you just get on with your energetic input as is? But what's not being translated is that a lot of these people who would really benefit from coming along to environmental volunteering activities have other competing demands on their time: housing, work, children, etc., and health concerns. So it's how do we translate the value of that in supporting us to then take the load off those participants to be able to come and get benefit.
Can I make just a very sort of slightly cheeky comment in how to imagine the budgets that are being used to pay for the big consultancy firms, if that was given to the volunteers? Just a thought, perhaps.
Very timely.
Hi, sorry, could I just make a comment? So I work in the mental health division at the Department of Health, the Commonwealth. There is an area within the department who is at the present time developing Australia's first national health adaptation plan strategy. Consultation is actually open now until the end of July, so I would really encourage everybody. I'm hearing we need to know what the issues are. We need to know what your solutions are. I would really encourage everyone to share your views via that consultation process as well. Yes, yeah, the climate, it's the first national health climate change adaptation strategy. Yeah.
So we've just got a question online via Twitter.
So the question is, why do governments undervalue people with disabilities and mental ill health, and how badly natural disasters affect these communities? do we need more people with lived experience in government decisions, or to to be at the policy table?
I think there's a universal yes. Does anyone want to add more?
Yes, I'd like to say something about it. Yeah, absolutely. We need people with lived experience at all the tables, and not just one person. You know, we need to have, you know, at least equal power when we're coming to these tables to be talking about what's needed. I think that a really big issue is that people who are very directly impacted by climate change are often the victims of comfort of those who aren't directly impacted by climate change. So they don't get to feel the real human suffering. They don't get to see, they don't smell it, they don't see it, they don't hear it, you know, like they don't understand the depth and the breadth of the height and the impact that this really has. It's very easy to sit there and watch the news or read things or do research. But unless you've really been in the middle of it, it's very difficult to feel a really deep connection and passionate about it enough to drive fast enough the changes that are needed, you know. So we become victims of other people's comfort. And I think that that's a really big issue. But I think that also what's a really big issue is that we need to, like there needs to be a very large percentage of the people in every community who've had training about, say, accidental counsellor or that kind of thing. You know, I'm used to doing peer support, so it's okay for me. But, you know, as I said in my presentation, we moved from stories at about the 4-month mark. We moved from stories about what happened to me to I'm suicidal, and the community, just as we had to all be there for each other during those floods and fires, we need to be able to be there for these conversations that inevitably happen.
Thank you.
I've noticed Ben has his hand up there.
There's actually there's a gentleman here as well. I don't know. Do we have? Yeah, great. We have one. Thanks, Faye. I may as well, second question. Yeah, that's great.
I just wanted to
So I just want to start off saying thank you to everybody that's here. You've had some really, really good and thoughtful responses to the issue. And I just want to also put a point on the personal responsibility. Coming as an immigrant into Australia, I have seen how the media and the government put a heavy amount of personal responsibility on everyday Australians without taking that responsibility back on themselves. And I've seen that time and time again, especially through the pandemic, where personal responsibility reigned supreme and the governmental responsibility was incredibly lacking, and that has had a further reverberation. Going into my question, which is, I work in grassroots mental health, and I have seen a rejection of climate science, especially from people within rural backgrounds and within the trades. And that is, you know, very reactive, but they're also the people that are in places where they can make a real difference as well with the messaging getting through. So my question is, how do we work with these people in rural environments and these people that are in blue collar jobs to fight against the disinformation that they're coming across and finding community within as well?
Grant, do you want to answer this question?
Yeah, so I think we've, if I've understood the question, it's around sort of non-scientific views around climate change. And one good thing is that I think we've seen a much broader acceptance of the science in the last couple of decades than, you know, there was still a lot of people around 2 decades ago who were really rusted on climate skeptic, climate deniers. And, you know, having sort of, I was giving a lot of public talks with my colleagues around the country, and you'd be having some sort of fairly unhinged debates. Now, having said that, more broadly, I think it's absolutely critical that we take everybody with us, and particularly in Australia, where we are a very fossil fuel dependent country, and that we don't demonise particular groups either, because the reality is all of us, it's very easy when you're working, not in sort of a greenhouse emitting industry, to sort of point the finger. And yet, here we all are, and chances are there is fossil fuels powering every one of our computers and the lights where the conference is at today, I guess. So we're all in it, and we have to take people with us, and we have to have what's often called a just transition. And that means that we look very carefully from a social perspective at how we help people move, what jobs can we create from, how do they get new skills, and so I would very much be moving towards that. Having said that, one last point, you will meet some people, especially in this day and age of sort of social media, little echo chambers of insanity, that you will meet people where you're just not going to get a lot of traction having a big debate about the climate science with them, and perhaps just don't waste your energy in that regard and move on. But I hope that's helpful. They're just a few thoughts I've got about climate skepticism and climate denial over the last few years.
Thank you very much, Grant. And I just want to find out timing. Do we have time for?
Run to Ben online, and then Rose, and then the lady down here.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, as brief as possible.
I'll be as brief as possible. By this one, I'm going to throw to you. I'm just going to be slightly slow and measured in what I'm thinking about in terms of the role class can play in the way we think about climate change and climate science. And also in that context, the divide between remote and rural class systems and a more sort of elite urban class systems that we might point to. I don't know whether anyone's ever heard of a poem, I think Henry Lawson wrote it, called Said Hanrahan. And it was a well-known poem about the way Australia managed a constant flow of drought and flood, and that it was just an accepted part of our culture, and communities themselves managed these crises. Governments weren't involved in these things to a large extent, sort of thing. And I think as a country we've evolved in looking at these issues like drought and flood in a way that we've always been able to almost manage them in the past, and that's changed now. And I think, if I'm sitting at the on the veranda at the Berlin Hotel with a couple of old mates talking about this and talking about the old floods and how they managed those floods and those sorts of things, it's a very, very different dialogue and narrative. A very different dialogue and narrative to the more gentrified urban dialogue and narrative that we use. And I'm not, disparaging the notion we need data, we need frameworks, we need initiatives, government support, that sort of thing. But there's a nexus in communication in the way that our brothers and sisters that have been brought up in generations and generations, actually managing floods and managing fires and managing these things. And now it's a very, very different world. It's not a question. I'm just curious as any thoughts you might have on those different communication analytics that exist between those two different ways of thinking, that we've always got through it. We've always rolled up our sleeves as a community and did what you talked about in Lismore, but we can't do that anymore.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. We've got two more.
Yeah, Ben, I think that there is a disconnect, and that needs to be that disconnect needs to be filled, or so that there is understanding. I think we saw, when the New South Wales Premier finally came up to the floods, there was a change in his attitude, because you just cannot understand what it's like unless you've been here, unless you were involved in seeing it. And they came after the worst of it, of course. So yeah, I think it's really important.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Faye. I've just been really encouraged very strongly for every person with lived experience in Australia. I think that people need to hear more from Faye, and so to political people need to hear voices like Faye's and Faye's as well in a greater level. Because like I had my family that I grew up in, and we're a family of 5, one has passed, but every one of them except me, I was in Canberra, were all in evacuation shelters in Eden, Tathra and Merimbula down the south coast when they had those horrendous fires. They weren't in a position to be looking at what food policy or anything else was all about. They were looking at the desperation to get people accommodation, to all the community to band together for people to have a decent meals, for people to have a safe shelter. My dad was a really old man in his 80s and was in Tathra and a really sheltered, but the hand of the community, and I saw a lot of this on television, was absolutely excelled. We can be proud to call ourselves Australians. And so I'm sitting here today for Mental Health Community Coalition, and it's representing them. And they have some wonderful people on board, and so does Mental Health Consumer Network, to get some of these things out. But it's really wrong when people, like my daughter's a behaviour therapist, and she has had massive lived experience.
Sorry, Rose, we're running. Can you ask a question? We're running really close at time. That's okay.
So people that have not had lived experience, is it possible for them to go to a higher degree when they're being educated and have really not had any much lived experience in these areas, for them to be able to go greater out into the communities in our nation to learn more about how the people are actually living lived experience in the community?
Devin, do you want to answer some of the things that you come across in terms of looking at equality and standards of living?
Thank you. In our education, it's interesting because we do Canberra, there are 2 Canberras in a way, and there's a Canberra that many people experience that's relatively privileged, and there's another Canberra that's not, and it's largely invisible if you're part of the privileged set of Canberrans. And I think education and integrating, learning about how other people who really are your neighbors, like 20 meters down, understanding more about their lives. I mean, we can do it formally through the universities or other sort of formal education, but I think there's much to be said about other methods as well, and just about what it means to be a community. And we used to know our neighbor 30 yards down, and we don't in a way. But you raised some excellent points. Thank you.
Grant, maybe it's time for Beyond Blue to do a series of films on people with lived experience involved in natural disasters, and the fact that they were really contributing members of society as well, breaking down attitudes, negative responses and attitudes towards people with lived experience, and bringing education about this to the community.
Thanks, Faye. I think we're going to have one more question, and then we're 8 minutes overdue, but everyone's staying in their seats because they're riveted. So let's have this one last
I'll
question.
just make it really quick. So I'm a mental health and suicide prevention advocate, and with the company Roses in the Ocean, they utilize people's personal stories and getting out into the media, whether that's Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, whatever, or TV or whatever. Getting the stories out is really, really powerful. So how can we utilize people telling their personal stories and raising awareness for, you know, politicians and people in government and that kind of thing?
I think I'll take a stab at this. You know, coming from MEAC's background for about 20 years, I think personal stories are key. It's a matter of we have social media, we have blogs, we have much more options now in terms of how to share those stories. I'd say that it might be worthwhile for people to get together to have some sort of, you know, quality assurance to make sure that you know the stories are done well. There's the focus on what the objective is, and there's also a program called Honest, Open, Proud, which is about how to share stories. But that's a free resource through the States from Patrick Corrigan. I'll give that a plug because I'm also involved in that. But thank you very much. I think we're about finishing up. I just want to say that I work with young people. And I think the key is also keeping hope. And hope in this environment means I think it would be helpful. In Canberra, we're lucky we can get out, you know, whenever we can into nature, taking young people into nature, but also as adults trying to find cohorts and groups that are like-minded, so you don't go through it alone. Just like depression, you don't want to go through depression alone, and you don't want to go through social change and climate change on your own. So I want to thank everyone, all the panelists. I want to thank you very much for coming on. And our guests and our panelists online, and thank you very much. And now we have one more thing that we've actually, here we go.
On behalf of MHCCACT, very quick because I know we've gone over time, and thank you everyone for staying with us, and also people have stayed with us online. It's been such a fantastic discussion. I think we could have kept going longer, just with the energy and also just so many important questions. It's a really important topic. So please keep the conversation going beyond today and taking the actions, as I think some of our panelists have alluded to. I just want to say a very big thank you to yourself, Keith. You're becoming a bit of a fixture at our forums. You've done.
That's good though. Thank you very much.
I know you get anxious, but you do such a fantastic job, and we're so thrilled that you're able to be our MC for us today. So thank you very much. And whenever you present at our events, you always get a great plant. So it's one of the things you get with us.
And you're still alive. Thank
and
you
that, yes, hopefully. Again, big thank you to really great panel, Leanne, Sharon, Devin, also Grant and Faye online. You've been fantastic and very much appreciated. And just finally, I want to say these events are always a huge amount of work for the team behind the scenes. You've all been fantastic. Rani, amazing. Erin, who's been doing so much multitasking today. And Ben online, I know you wanted to be here in person, but I'm so glad that we're able to still benefit from your contribution. And you also did really do a lot of work too for the event too. So thank you to all of you. And thanks to everyone for coming, and please enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
He's sitting there with finances under his belt, you know, and it's all around. It's like around. Lucky to meet you. Hopefully never, but how are you? Thank you. Very good. That's right, true. Natural sports are great, and it's going there. We don't want trying to get Yeah, that's a nice area. I like it.